Welcome into Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolf here, and no Gavin today, but I am joined by a fantastic guest. I have JJ Jackson from the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. And who else are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about AJ Griffin, who is seeing himself tied to the Knicks quite a bit lately. Talk about the injury history, AJ's play at Duke, where he's going to fit positionally in the NBA, how concerning his defense is, or not concerning. Maybe JJ totally loves it. But we're going to talk about all that. Plus, talk about Mark Williams, his candidacy to potentially be a pick for the Knicks. If Paolo Banchero is like that dude that you mortgage the future and everything else to trade up for. Not that I necessarily think the Knicks would do that, but it's still fun to talk about. And we talk about Coach K's legacy and how, things are going to go for Duke now with him gone and how he might have affected a guy like AJ Griffin. So that's all next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome into Locked On Knicks. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you guys making us a part of your daily routine. And today's show is brought to you by Arcade One Up. Locked On is partnering with Arcade One Up to give away 3 free NBA Jam Shack machines. Stay tuned for later in the show to learn how to enter. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And as I mentioned, I'm joined by JJ Jackson, Triple J, to talk about some Duke Blue Devils. He is, of course, the host of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. So I won't hold this up any longer. Let's get right into this awesome discussion about AJ Griffin and the guys. All right, as promised, I am joined by JJ Jackson of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. If any of you happen to check the episode out, I did an episode with JJ, I think prior to last Knicks season, checking in on RJ Barrett. So I'm calling in to return my favor now that it's draft time so that we can get the goods on AJ Griffin and Paolo Banchero. JJ, how you doing? How's the draft process treating you, honestly? I'm kind of curious from like a team specific pod perspective. Like how is it for you when you've got two guys that are projected to probably go in the top 10-ish?
Yeah, no, Alex, it's good to be back with you. That was a lot of fun the last time we were able to chat on my podcast, and I'd absolutely jump at the opportunity to return the favor. So glad to be here. In regards to the happenings of Locked On Blue Devils, what a whirlwind of a season it's been. I know all of the basketball world was at least somewhat aware of the fact that Mike Krzyzewski was going into his last year as the head coach of Duke basketball. So a lot of eyeballs on this team, and now Duke's got, of course, Paolo and AJ closer to the top. Mark Williams seems to be solidified towards the back end of that lottery. And then a couple of more guys in Trevor Keels and Wendell Moore Jr. that are hoping to be called at the end of the first round. Kentucky in 2010 set the record with 5 first-round picks. And this is the first time a school has legitimately had a chance to try and tie that record. So it's been a whole lot of fun, man. At this point, I'm just counting down the days until we can get to that draft to finally know where guys are going and that sort of thing. And from the NBA perspective, I would imagine it's starting to get to that point for you as well, where it's like, all right, we're talking a lot about this. Let's just go ahead and see what these results are.
Yeah, we're we're certainly waiting with bated breath to see who's going to end up there for the Knicks, because I think the main thing is there's been a lot of rumors of guys moving up into the top 10 and stuff like that. Dyson Daniels is one of them, who's actually one of my favorites. I'm kind of sad to see that he's moving up like that. But Shaden Sharp declares late and then, kind of shakes up the top 10 that way. So it's going to be really intriguing to see who makes it outside of the top 10. And to a team like the Knicks, who are sitting kind of just outside that range, ready to kind of poach whoever ends up there potentially. And one of those guys, of course, is AJ Griffin, who I want to lead the show off. Although I do want to talk about Coach K in a minute too, and I have a way to link that to AJ. But I don't think we could start any AJ Griffin conversation without talking about the injury history first. He came into the season hurt for Duke, and then got on the floor and put up honestly historic shooting numbers, or maybe not quite historic, but I mean pretty darn close. Like you shoot 45% from three. That's really notable, especially when you have a stroke that looks as nice as his does. But I think the injury concerns persisted throughout the year, all the way up until the tournament, when of course he went down at one point, but then was able to come right back for the next game. Um, it's I think at this point it's safe to say, like, how sturdy is this guy's lower body? As much as he looks like a specimen, clearly there's some issues going on there where he had some injuries in high school and then the injuries at Duke as well. So what's your read on his injury history? Because I think that's the honestly, in a vacuum, without that injury history, I don't think there's any way that we're even talking about him potentially making it to the Knicks at pick 11. So, what's your read on that? Do you think that he's healthy? Do you think that he sort of was working his way into shape throughout the year for Duke? Like, what's your just overall read on that situation?
I think we started to get there. I think he is starting to work his way into shape a little bit. Obviously, the injuries in high school were concerning, not playing a full season of ball really until this past year for Duke. You start this season off going into preseason, and as their team is really ramping up for the first game of the year against Kentucky, by the way, it's not some small school for Duke to get kind of acclimated with playing against one another. They're starting off the year in the Garden against Kentucky, and for Duke to go out and have AJ actually available for them in that game. He didn't play a whole lot, just a few minutes in the first game of the season, but ever since that moment, he really did start to work himself back into playing shape, and the injuries weren't that big of a concern at the start. It was just simply, hey, this guy hasn't played in a really long time, a full season of basketball. So he is athletic, and you didn't get to see a whole lot of that because it didn't feel like he was as confident in his leaping ability. It took him a long while to get a dunk. And when you're 6'6" and playing on a team like Duke and you've got a lot of open opportunities, you'd figure it'd come a little bit sooner. But as he continued throughout the year, he really was one of the top players for Duke. And it was really awesome to see how much fun he was having because you could tell how much the injuries were a part of his past. And then, as you mentioned, in Michigan State, round of 32, he unfortunately got hurt towards the end of that game. But then Duke had a full week off until they played again, and he was able to play the rest of the tournament. So really, for AJ Griffin, he didn't miss a single game. He played in every game and didn't miss a single game this season. There are just those big question marks of his injury past as to whether or not you want to make that type of draft investment in a guy like him.
Yeah, I think that's I honestly had not realized that he did not miss a game this year until like you look at the game logs. But the way that people talk about him, you would think that he spent half the year. People almost talk about him in some ways as if it's like Michael Porter Jr. again or something like that. And MPJ was very different because I mean he sat basically the whole year.
Right.
If not, I think he managed to play like a handful of games, but it was really not a lot. And then he was sidelined with that back injury that still is bothering him today. Whereas with AJ, it's I guess more about like how he looks. Like is it? I think I'm gonna skip questions and go to this one because this is the thing that I think concerns me the most. Obviously, on offense, he was really good. He shot the lights out, and it seems like he was able to, in sort of an RJ Barrett sort of way, even if he wasn't super fast and super explosive, like maybe he once was on those legs, like he was able to use his craft to get inside and stuff like that. But on defense is where I think people have some question marks. I mean, obviously at his size, he projects more as a wing at the next level. Like actually, while we're talking about RJ Barrett, I think he's sort of in build sort of resembles RJ a little bit. 6'6", just like built like a grown man already, ready to just kind of get right into the NBA. But positionally, where do you think he's going to fit in the NBA? Do you think that he can guard wings? Do you think that he has that lateral quickness and stuff? Because it seems like that was something that he showed flashes of in college, but maybe didn't have the consistency you would want out of a guy that you would be taking potentially as high as him. And maybe that's also part of why he's dropping at this point.
Yeah, no, I do think he's going to be able to guard wings at the next level. I understand where the concern and the holdup might be. I think when you look at what you're watching for Duke, obviously an advantage for a program like that is, as I mentioned, they do have 5 guys that are likely to be drafted this season. He's playing with a lot of really good defenders. Outside of that, they've got elite rim protection in Mark Williams. Wendell Moore Jr. was regarded as one of the best wings defenders in the conference. And so he would typically take one of the better wings out there on the floor defensively. And then Paulo's out there as well. So there are a lot of guys out there on the floor for Duke that are having to make an impact on the defensive end. So AJ Griffin didn't have as tough of assignments from time to time throughout the season. But I think that absolutely, as he gets into the NBA, you're going to have to defend in order to stay on the floor. And as he continues to play more basketball, just like anything, when you continue to do something and you know, okay, I'm good, I'm not going to be injured, I can be confident in this, he's going to start to gain that confidence and really benefit from that.
All right, I'll be right back in with JJ talking about some of the other guys on Duke, Mark Williams, Paolo Banchero, and also Coach K's legacy. A lot to get into with the rest of this show other than just AJ Griffin. But I have to let you guys know today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. And you know our friends at Built are always coming out with amazing new flavors. This time, they've truly outdone themselves with their new mud pie flavor. And for the first time ever, Built is introducing the new mud pie flavor in both a mud pie bar and a mud pie puff. Rare that you get the double flavor combination. Not sure what mud pie tastes like? Well, if you're a chocolate fan, you'd better sit down for this. The new mud pie bar is rich whipped cream and chocolate mousse smothered in 100% real chocolate and topped with a cookies and cream crumble. It's, man, you probably ask some people from Duke about that because I think it's a big Southern flavor. You've got to try mud pie as soon as possible, and you need to hurry because the mud pie bar and mud pie puff are only available for a limited time. Make sure to visit built.com to taste the deliciousness for yourself. And if you're not convinced, luckily we saved the best part for last. It's actually good for you too. No, seriously, all Built products are low in calories, high in protein, and low in sugar. Mud pie is packed with 16 grams of protein and only 150 calories and 8 grams of sugar. It's like your mom baked the most deliciously creamy chocolate mud pie and wrapped it up just for you, of course, covered in 100% real chocolate because all Built bars are. You're going to love the new Mud Pie Built Bar and Built Puff. Whether you need a snack for your workout, a late night treat, or just need to grab a quick bite, Built is the perfect protein bar, and they taste better than a candy bar. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15, and you can get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Yeah, so on another note here, I also was curious about his role and the overall, I guess we'll call it inconsistency. So I have some concerns with how Coach K was coaching guys
Yeah.
for years. I mean, I felt like honestly, and this goes all the way back to when I was doing, when we were so invested in that 2019 team. Obviously, as Knicks fans, I watched a lot that year in particular and saw a lot of RJ and Zion and Cam. And I just remember thinking, like, he has so much talent on this team, and yet it seems like Coach K every year would sort of pick like the guy, quote unquote, and be like, okay, the offense runs through you. And even though I have a bunch of other 5-star guys on the floor right now, I'm not going to necessarily treat them like that. And I think that it seems like maybe that was the case with AJ to me a little bit this year, where some games he would be a little more prominent, but Paolo was like the guy to have out there with the ball in his hands and be like the scorer. And it seems to me like then AJ got a little lost in the shuffle. But like, what was your read on that situation? Do you think that AJ was more like disappearing because of something related to him, or do you think it was more game plan related with Coach K, where there were just some games where he just wasn't being featured as much?
I think it's that latter. I think because there's so many mouths to feed, so to speak, on a team like that in a game like college basketball, which again, I have to remind myself and a lot of people that from your perspective are watching so much NBA and then jump back into the college game. The floor is smaller. There's just not as much spacing when you're taking a look at everything out there. It can sort of be clogged. And then from the Coach K perspective, with all the talent that's been there, it's not wise for any of us to sit here and start to doubt what he's doing, so to speak, being the all-time winningest coach in college hoops and 5 national championships and what he was able to do on the Olympic level. But it's also fair to say that it's okay that Duke's going to move on and bring in a younger guy and Jon Scheyer, a bright-minded for Coach K to go into the retirement phase of his life at 75, because it did start to feel, as you're saying, towards the end of his career, where hey, let's just play ball with our best players out there on the floor and let them kind of work things out on the fly. It worked. A lot of times Duke was able to win really big, important games, but sometimes from the basketball perspective, they would also have some funky or ugly losses that would pop up every now and again, and the basketball wouldn't be the best to watch and that sort of thing. So I do think it's fair to say that AJ Griffin at times didn't look like he was as engaged because there were other kind of ball dominant players in the system, and it was difficult to find ways to get him involved. But if you really want to see AJ Griffin, like the game to pull up for AJ Griffin is the game against North Carolina in the Dean Dome in Chapel Hill. Coach K and Duke walked in and knocked off North Carolina, and AJ had 27 points in that one, was the star player of both teams on the floor. Like, that's one of the games I would go to for anybody to check out and be like, yep, that's him. That's AJ Griffin that we love.
Yeah, I might go in and watch that game over again. I've definitely watched some of that, and it might be worth a rewatch,
Yeah.
especially as the Knicks talk ramps up a little bit here towards the draft. Although I don't want to set myself up for disappointment either. I've definitely done that before. I wanted to, as an aside, talk about Coach K for just a second, because you just mentioned it right there. Like, even people that cover the team and watch the team all the time, have maybe questioned where he was at coaching wise. Like I said, I'll make no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I thought that, especially for his last, like, I don't know, 6-7 years, that the game had sort of passed him by a little bit. And granted, he still managed to lead these teams, these star-studded teams, to good results. Like, he made the Final Four this year. It's not like he did nothing, you know what I mean? But like, it does make me wonder a little bit, like, how this team is going to react. Like, what's your overall thought on, first off, the recruiting? Because it does seem like he's still going to play a role with Scheyer there. He just doesn't want to be full-time coaching anymore. So obviously, if Scheyer still needs him to come in and plot the rings on the table, a la Pat Riley or whatever, he can still come in and do that in recruit meetings, and I'm sure he'd be happy to do it in retirement. So I doubt that there's going to be that big of a change in their recruitment, but I'm curious about your thoughts on that. And then also, how do you think things are going to change from a coaching perspective at Duke? Because I think we saw, like, Hubert Davis come into, North Carolina, and with I would say probably one of their less talented teams in years, make a finals, with that. And, if not, maybe for some injuries like to Baycott in the final there, maybe they end up winning. And so I'm kind of curious what you think about Scheyer and him coming in and taking over for, again, similar situation. It's so weird how, like, these parallels run between North
Yeah.
Carolina and Duke, where both of their Hall of Fame coaches retire within like a couple years of one another. They're getting like young up and comers that were previous, guards at the university coming in to coach. Like, there's a lot of similarities, but I think that Duke is going to have more firepower as usual, like more recruiting juice, like they always do. But then if Scheyer can have a similar effect, like coaching, I think that they could be on the verge of becoming like a multiple national championship powerhouse again, over the course of a number of years. But what's your overall read on that situation? How are, like, Duke fans feeling about that transition?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there for sure. I'm excited, and I know that a lot of Duke fans are as well, because it is an opportunity to start something fresh and real, and also unknown. Because myself included, and Jon Scheyer. This is the crazy thing to think about. Like, at 26 years old, the only thing I've known in my life is Coach K being the head coach at Duke. The man who's following him, Jon Scheyer, at 33 years old, the only thing Jon Scheyer has known in his life is Coach K being the head coach at Duke. It's just crazy how long someone's been there. And so to go through this process is way different and something that we're not used to. Coach K did not change offices. He is still in more of an advisory role for the university there. He and his family do have a lot of charity and big investments into the university and kind of growing the Durham area and that sort of thing. And that's very much so something that he's still passionate about and wants to give back and take part. And he has been around for a number of the recruiting visits. Jon Scheyer is walking in to this upcoming basketball season with the number one recruiting class. That's like never happened before. When does a coach that's has never been a head coach before take over a program and all of a sudden they've got the number one recruiting class? Well, because Coach K and Duke tend to be of the forward thinking variety, they all of a sudden know that, hey, we should probably make a plan before Coach K actually retires to tell these recruits what's going on. And so he's got the number one class. You jump ahead to 2023, guys that are about to be seniors. Duke's got the number one class. So they're set up to do really well in that regard. And then also from the Scheyer perspective, they recently hired Rachel Baker to take over as the team's general manager. No college basketball team has a general manager. What in the world is happening here? But she's got Nike EYBL ties. She worked a little bit in the NBA league office. And as NIL, as the name, image, likeness laws continue to be more and more in play and more of a factor in the college game, like it just makes sense for Scheyer to hire somebody like that who was leading Nike EYBL and can be a direct plug to get you into the places you need to be to see the best talent in America. Not that they needed that, but just to kind of show you where Duke is at. And then I'll also add, when Jon Scheyer becomes the head coach, he needs to find somebody to replace him as his role as an assistant coach. And so instead of getting a former Duke coach that's out there, because there are hundreds of them, he goes over to Kentucky and takes Jay Lucas, who is the number 2 recruiter in college basketball. Jon Scheyer was number 1. He's like, you know what? Kentucky is always right behind us. Let's go take their top recruiter and have him join Duke. So they're going to be so fine on recruiting. It's not even funny. Now the question's just going to become, can they put the results together on the floor? And for somebody like Jon Scheyer, who is 33, Coach K was 33 years old when he started the job as Duke's head coach. I think Shirer's going to be super excited to be able to show off how much basketball he knows. And he's just so young and energetic that you're going to get to see that.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like the rich are getting richer as far as the recruiting process goes. As someone who, I'll be honest, outside of getting RJ Barrett and now Cam Reddish and having all this investment in Duke in that way, I was never a huge Duke fan. So looking at it now, I'm like, man, they're going to be really good for a long time again.
The elite staying elite. Yeah, I mean,
that's there's no hiccups. No hiccups going to happen there. I guess that's what happens when you build up like a 50-year reputation of being an elite blue chip program.
For sure.
That just happens for you.
And we see, like you mentioned, North Carolina and Hubert Davis taking the Tar Heels all the way to the Final Four where they knocked off Duke. The fact that the basketball gods understand this rivalry. They've never played in the NCAA tournament before. And so, of course, in Coach K's final season, they're going to have that meeting happen for the first time. And unfortunately, North Carolina got the win there. But North Carolina was an 8 seed. You mentioned kind of the talent on their roster. They weren't that great throughout the majority of the season. They would play really well, and then they really wouldn't show up for some games. And so another kind of proof that the NCAA tournament is kind of a crapshoot, honestly. It's 64 teams make it. The best team doesn't always win. The 2015 Kentucky team that went undefeated all the way till the Final Four doesn't have a championship on their finger, but the Duke Blue Devils do, because that season they also were really good with Jahlil Okafor, Tyus Jones, and Justice Winslow, and able to win it in that regard. And the Zion and RJ Barrett team, as Knicks fans well know or might remember, that team made it all the way to the Elite Eight, one step away from the Final Four. And if RJ Barrett made a couple of free throws down the stretch, Duke would have continued playing further into the dance. So I'm really excited. I think the rivalry is still going to be just as great as it always is. And it's going to have really good basketball players on both sides, because I think you're starting to see better players enter the North Carolina world as well under Hubert Davis's recruiting.
All right, I'll be right back in to finish up talking with JJ about some of the other prospects that could potentially be available to the Knicks, mostly Mark Williams, but a little Paolo Banchero talk in there as well. He's an intriguing dude, of course, potential top 3 pick. Talk about whether he's worth really like trading the farm for or not. But I love doing the first part of this read. Boom shakalaka. We have big news. The one, the only NBA Jam is back. Arcade One Up, the leader in at-home retro arcade games, is not only bringing the best game ever back, but they've made it bigger than ever with a, wait for it, Shaq Edition machine. I don't know why you would get any machine other than the Shaq one, because honestly, Shaq's kind of dominant in NBA Jam. You can throw the oops. You can, throw down those power dunks. He's a big time rebounder, maybe lacking a little bit in the jump shots, but like goaltending doesn't exist really in NBA Jam. So Shaq's like the dude. So I would love to get a Shaq Edition machine. And people are obsessed with NBA Jam. And I'm thrilled to tell our listeners that you can once again play hoops with NBA legends in this arcade classic. Jump clear across the court and set the ball on fire in one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, and no quarters required. Compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one, up.com. For an estimated early September ship date, Arcade One Up is the place for fun. They've got even more classics like Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, and many others starting at just $399, which for a full-on arcade cabinet, not too shabby. Check this out. They're giving away an NBA Jam Shaq Edition to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to win a game console for your man cave at arcade1up.com/locked on. That's arcade, the number one, up.com/locked on. You've got until July 8th to enter to win the NBA Jam Shaq Edition console. Don't miss out. Enter today. Who are you going to play with? Better be Patrick Ewing. Yeah. So getting back to some of the Duke players,
Yeah.
I wanted to briefly touch on. I only mentioned Paolo before the show, but then I was thinking about it. I was like, I should probably ask you about Mark Williams a little bit too, considering the Knicks have also had some, whether through official channels or not. There's been like our very own, coworker Rafael Barlow mocked Mark Williams to the Knicks at one point and caught a bunch of heat from Knicks fans on YouTube comments and stuff, because I don't think too many people are super enthused about potentially using the pick on a center. But the possibility does exist. And, the Knicks are looking at a potential Mitchell Robinson-less world right now. And if that happens, then you're going to have a pretty gaping hole at center, because as much as everybody wants to be like, oh, you just drafted Jericho Sims, he's really good. I don't think anyone that watched the games this year would be like, he's definitely ready to start year two. He was a little bit of a project coming in. He showed some great intangibles, but like he still has foul issues, just like any young big does. And he still needs to learn coverages more and stuff like that. So like, it would definitely be helpful to have another center on the roster that knows what they're doing, and maybe one that can stay on the court a little more than like Nerlens Noel. So to get to Mark Williams, looking at him, first off, he's enormous. Like,
Huge.
I mean, he would step on an NBA floor and be one of the biggest guys on the floor, just by virtue of his height and his wingspan. He measured great, at the combine and all that stuff. Like, he's a really, really big dude, like much bigger than like Jalen Duren, even, at least from a pure size perspective, even though Duren is like more chiseled and whatever. But like, he's got that prototypical, at least sort of classic NBA center size. But I guess that leads me to my first and most important question about Mark Williams. How do you feel about his ability to stay on the floor in the NBA, both on the offensive end and on the defensive end? Because I think that we just saw in the NBA finals and throughout the playoffs, and this has been a trend for a number of years now, like some of the best centers in the league get played off the floor routinely. And that's become sort of an issue. Like, that makes it so that it's a little hard to justify spending like a top 15 pick on a true center like that, a true 7-footer, if you're not confident that they can like defend in space and maybe at least hit like a mid-range jumper to space the floor a little bit. So how do you feel about Mark, coming into the NBA and his ability to be a more modern NBA big, despite looking and in many ways feeling like a more traditional big?
Unbelievably excited is how I feel about Mark Williams joining the league. I think this guy is going to be outstanding. You mentioned the measurables, Alex, and obviously when you watch him play or just look at him, you could tell like, yep, that's a 7-footer, and he's blocking every shot out there. So I would imagine the wingspan is there. I'd also throw out to people that at the combine, Mark Williams came in and measured at a 5.4% body fat. which is just unbelievable. That's not heard of for somebody that large for that to be the case. But this is somebody that really does take pride in his body and the shape that he's in. So on the defensive end this year, he was one of the top rim protectors in the country. Had like 4.8 blocks per 40 minutes, which was one of the top 15 marks in all of college basketball. And when you say college basketball, I got to remind people that there are 353 Division I teams that are always in the statistical measures. So you've got some really small schools that are being factored into these numbers. So for Mark Williams to be that high is just so impressive. And then the other number that I love to throw out is Mark Williams was the only player in America that shot better than 70% from both the field and the free throw line. Does take advantage of his opportunity to get fouled. Only one person in America, and I just told you there are 353 Division I teams, had 70% shooting from the floor and the free throw line, and that was Mark Williams. So yeah, no, I'm so fired up to see where he could end up potentially in the NBA.
Yeah, well, certainly from a Knicks fan perspective, as much as I like Mitchell Robinson, one thing that has always been an issue is his inconsistency at the free throw line, and so that soft touch from Mark would probably be a improvement from day one for the Knicks right there at the center position, because they honestly have not had great free throw shooting at that spot in years. I can't even think of the last center that they had that was like a plus or at least
Yeah.
average free throw shooter, which usually an average free throw shooter for a center is the equivalent of a plus free throw shooter
Yeah.
for that position
No
at least.
kidding. No kidding. And then the other number that I just want to put into context as well for Mark Williams and his offensive game, speaking to that, because when you're shooting that well, you're obviously closer to the rim. And so Mark Williams finished the season on a team that we're talking about that has AJ Griffin, that has Paolo Banchero, and then Wendell Moore Jr. and Trevor Keels with 96 dunks. So he still got his. This team was able to drive to the rim and float the ball up to him, and he able to slam it home there. And for people wondering how important is that, well, for college basketball, since 2007, only 7 players have ever had greater than 95 dunks in a season. And Mark Williams came out at 96. Only 7 have had 95 plus, that being Bam Adebayo, Udoka Azubuike, Montrezl Harrell, Obi Toppin of Knicks fame, Taco Fall, and then Anthony Davis. I mean, those are all NBA guys that I just rattled off there, and Mark Williams joins that group as well.
Yeah, and I think that he splits the difference there between a guy like a Taco, who was obviously that was all he did because
Yeah,
like he could just dunk it standing up, so that almost doesn't count.
right.
But then, a lot of other really elite athletes there that really have made their mark in the NBA otherwise. I wanted to briefly ask you about Paolo Banchero as well. And, I know that this is a pipe dream for the Knicks, and most of their trade up aspirations center on Jaden Ivey, it seems like, and rightfully so. I think that he fills more of a pressing need for them than a Banchero would, especially if Julius Randle was still on the roster. But assuming that there was a world where the Knicks had an opportunity to, let's say, trade up to 3 or 4 and, really bet the farm on Banchero, would you feel like that's a good decision? Like, do you think that he is really the real deal, like potential superstar in the NBA? Do you think that he's going to be, as what most people have thought about this draft class in general, like potentially a fringe all-star, like basically, I think to justify trading all the way up that way for him, he would have to be like an all NBAer and like a multi-time all NBA guy if you're going to like mortgage your whole, system for him. So what's your overall read on him? Like, do you think that he's going to come into the league and have the potential to be more of that like all NBA guy? Or do you think like, and there's nothing wrong with this, that he's going to be like just a really, really good player and a really good scorer, and maybe not necessarily that like top, top 20 tier or whatever in the NBA at any given time?
Yeah, I'm certainly excited to see what he's going to be able to accomplish at the next level. And it's really hard to sit here each and every year and figure, okay, is this guy worth trading everything for to move up and get him into our world? But for somebody like Paulo, I think his basketball IQ is certainly really impressive. His ability to put the ball on the deck finish through contact, be as big as he is. He's compared often to Auburn's Jabari Smith, which also hits close to home to me. I'm an Auburn University alum, so follow a lot of what Jabari Smith was able to do this season. And Paulo's not quite the shooter that Jabari Smith is, but Paolo getting to the rim and being more a playmaker with the ball in his hands, we saw that way more than we did out of a guy like Jabari this past season. So in that respect, I am excited for what he could bring to the next level. For Duke, we mentioned sort of their dominance of recruiting, and you go all the way back to Kyrie Irving in 2011 when Coach K kind of really dialed in and wanted to dominate the one and done era of basketball. So all of a sudden we've got Jason Tatum, who's concluded the NBA Finals but just finished his first season as an all NBA player at the league. First team, I might throw out there as well. But for a guy like Jason Tatum, I could give you Jabari Parker too, right? The top three guys selected out of Duke where things didn't necessarily go his way. Marvin Bagley still trying to figure out what his role is in the NBA. But then another guy like Jason Tatum would be Brandon Ingram and how amazing he's been for the Pelicans since he's taken over. So Duke has proven that they do have some guys that are really worth throwing everything you got for that really can impact winning. And I think Paulo's one of those. And I'll also conclude, I know this is a little long-winded, with the fact that Paulo's from Seattle, right? The Seattle hooping community is just crazy. You know, Jamal Crawford has always been the flag bearer for that area. But you look at a guy like Zach LaVine, you look at a guy like DeJounte Murray, you look at somebody like Isaiah Thomas. There are so many guys from the Seattle area that always champion one another when it comes to basketball. And Paolo is in that company. He is always, since he was a freshman in high school, has always been invited to those runs in the summer. Can you imagine being a freshman in high school and these NBA players are hitting you up and saying, hey, we want you to come play pickup with us? Like, that would just be outstanding and amazing. And then now you think about it from the basketball perspective, and it's like, yeah, this dude really benefits from that. So that's why I do think Paolo has a chance to really be special at the next level. And so if a team did want to, you know, throw everything together and try and move up a little bit to get him, I think they'd make a good decision.
Yeah, and speaking of Seattle hoops, shout out to former Nick Nate Robinson as well
That's right.
in that group too.
I feel like every time I start to name them, I'm like, I know I'm forgetting somebody and I'm going to be ashamed of myself. But how did I forget Nate Robinson? Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely one of the most colorful characters to come out of that
No
area. Maybe not
kidding.
the best player overall,
No kidding.
but one of the best
That's
characters.
awesome.
All right, that's it for this first episode. Yeah, surprise. There's a second episode that I have coming. Of course, the Dukies, JJ, everybody, they love keeping up with their alums. So, although I'll probably do another show with JJ a little later this summer, getting into RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish's performances, I still open the floor up to JJ a little bit to ask me some questions about those two guys, how they played this year and all that stuff. To give a little bit of Knicks perspective. So that's coming up in a bonus episode in just a little bit. So keep your eyes out. If you're listening to this or watching this in the morning, then a couple hours from now in the afternoon, there will be a second episode in your feed. If you're listening to this in the afternoon, what are you doing? Go get on that second episode. We got a bonus episode for you guys today because we love you so much. So take a listen to that. And then Gavin actually has a great episode for you guys coming tomorrow, too. We got a jam-packed weekend as we get ready for the draft next week. So keep your eyes out for that as well. But until next time, in the bonus episode in a couple of minutes, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you guys all soon. Peace.